Welcome back warmly to the third part of our presentation. Um, we have a picture here that talks about a forward hedge. This is a graph of the example that we discussed in the second part together. The part of this graph that says part one has two nodes. One is the Swiss company Le Point, and one is the American company New Kitchen. And an arrow starting from Le Point and ending in New Kitchen tells us that at time zero, or today, conventionally today is time zero in finance and economics, the product, which in this case are knives, are shipped from Switzerland to USA. Then we have the future cash flow, which is at time 6 months from now, and it's promised in the future, and it is $1 million. And that cash flow contractually will go from New Kitchen to Le Point to pay for these knives that were purchased 6 months prior to the payment. This whole two knots and two arrows together could be called item number one, and that illustrates a sale on credit. Credit could be in domestic finance, doesn't have to be international finance. Next, we go to item number two. And this item number two gives us a picture of cash flows that take place in a forward deal. Le Point or Swiss company goes to the forward banker or takes a forward contract on over-the-counter market and promises to pay $1 million 6 months from now. So the time of this cash flow is in the future, and the arrow then will go from Le Point to the forward intermediary. And that forward intermediary promises contractually to pay 5.115 Swiss francs for every dollar, or multiply 5.115 by $1 million, 5,115,000 Swiss francs, and the timing of this cash flow is also 6 months from now. So two future cash flows, both are promised in the future. This item two, which is also colored pink, is a forward market contract. And as we had in the prior lectures, this forward contract could be viewed as walking at the harvest time and taking the harvest at a fixed price. But this fixed price is contracted now. So now we have a forward contract in foreign currencies. We could have forward contracts in commodities, and we could have forward contracts in other assets. Next, we have what will actually happen in the future. We don't know. But we could certainly look at a few scenarios and have an idea. So S subscript 6 months from now says what the spot exchange rate between Swiss franc and US dollar would be 6 months in the future. What would actually happen when that time arrives and uncertainty is resolved? As I said, and it's worth repeating again, we don't know. But let's view two scenarios for the case of learning for pedagogical reasons. Scenario number one, 6 months from now, 5 Swiss francs buy a US dollar. Again, I should emphasize that this number is just an example. Swiss franc can do anything against dollar, and as you and I know, these days it's close to parity. So 5 is one possible value. Okay, if Swiss franc is 5 per dollar, $1 million is worth 5 million Swiss francs. However, the point will not suffer this loss. It has a contract with a forward bank that takes this $1 million and gives the point 5,115,000 Swiss franc. In other words, the forward contract under this scenario, and I emphasize under the scenario of S of 6 months equal 5, gives us a 115,000 Swiss franc gain. However, future could be different. For example, in 6 months, Swiss franc is 6 Swiss franc per dollars. So in the open market, we would have gotten, if we were Lapointe and gave our $1 million, we would have 6 million Swiss francs. But we are obligated by this forward contract to give our $1 million to the forward bank. Otherwise, we would be in default of a contract and could be dragged to bankruptcy court. And forward market gives us 5,115,000 Swiss francs. The difference between this 5,115,000 and 6 million is 885,000 Swiss franc, which would be money we are making less than what we would have gotten in the open market. So notice that the forward contract or forward hedge does not always give you gains. It just guarantees a fixed price. You're giving up the losses and you're giving up the potential gains. You're settling on a price of 5.15115 Swiss franc per dollar, and this prevents any speculation in foreign exchange market, and you could treat the deal as a domestic deal if you're Lapointe. In fact, you could cross out this 1 million and that 1 million and say that this deal is like we're giving knives today to New Kitchen and we're receiving 5,115,000 Swiss francs 6 months from now from a forward bank. And the $1 million could completely be ignored. Let's talk a little bit about cost of this contract because we want to compare it to other methods of hedging, and then we want to discuss if those methods are more costly or less costly. I'll backtrack to the previous slide, and one of the potential costs is that if Swiss franc goes to 6, and the open market would have given us in the future 6 million Swiss francs, we can't take that. We have to take the 5,115,000. And the difference is 885,000. That's less money that we would make if we didn't have this hedge. Is that a loss? Well, that's a loaded question. My boss can call me to our office and yell at me and say, for your stupid contract, now we are getting 5,115,000 Swiss francs, but look at the open market. If it wasn't for that contract, we would have gotten 6 million Swiss francs. It's all your fault. And by the way, you're fired. That which I said jokingly does contain some reality. First of all, everyone in our firm should agree with this forward contract. They should realize what we are getting into. We're giving up the gains, the future gains, so that we won't have future losses. We're taking a fixed price, and everyone should understand that. Then I wouldn't be in trouble as the little guy who made this contract. And this could have other side effects too. If we are a large firm with large obligations in forward markets, let's say in oil contracts, and our competition doesn't have, we are airline industry, we have this in fuel, our competition doesn't have it, and they end up having large revenue streams that we don't, because we are taking this fixed contract and the prices have gone their way. Then these competitors would be in an advantage situation. They would be able to eat our lunch. We wouldn't be in a good competitive situation. So this issue of what will happen in the future, gains or losses, uh, does have some consequences. Let's go on one slide and redo this slide and think about it, read it, and um, learn it. This slide is asking us, what is the cost of this forward? What if uh, S of 6 months, a spot price in the future 6 months from now, is 5 Swiss francs per $1? Then in 6 months, instead of receiving 5 million Swiss francs from the spot market, LePointe receives $1 million times 5.115 Swiss franc per $1 equals to 5,115,000 Swiss franc from the forward market, and there is a gain of 115,000 Swiss francs in comparison to um, what we would have gotten from the open spot market in the future. And forward may cause a future gain and losses, but it locks us in today's sure forward price. What if 6 months from now Swiss franc is 6 per dollar? Then in 6 months, instead of receiving 6 million Swiss franc from the spot market, LePointe receives $1 million times 5.115 Swiss franc per dollar, or 5,115,000 Swiss francs. And then the question is this a cost? And I had two answers for this. And the reason I'm repeating this whole thing and putting them in a slide is that we are fully prepared for an exam situation. That exam would potentially ask you, is this a cost? And the answer would be, it depends. If we want to have a fixed price and calculate our cost and profit based on this fixed price, and don't speculate in foreign exchange markets, which often is the case. We want to focus on our core business. It is not. But then everyone in our business should understand what we are doing with forward contracts, and should understand the consequences. Forward contracts also have accounting consequences. They are part of our liabilities, and they eat into our ability to borrow money. So in that sense, they affect our creditworthiness too. There are some consequences for them. Another potential cost that some may discuss is how the future value that can be forecasted today would be different from this forward price. Well, the forward price is based on demand and supply of purchasing these forward contracts, and it is possible that there is a different forecast for the future. Mm, and some may consider forward overpriced or underpriced compared to that future forecast. My advice to you is to take a future forecast with a large grain of salt. No one can forecast future value of foreign exchange currencies, although there are um, those who speculate and bet in this market, and some of them have sophisticated procedures for doing that, and some of them purely gamble. But by no means you could trust future forecasts. So, with that said, let's look at a scenario where the 6 month um, let me go one slide forward. When the spot rate forecasted for 6 months from now. So we feel that spot rate uh, can be 5.235 6 months from now per dollar, Swiss francs per dollar. Now this spot rate is different from the forward rate that we actually contracted, and that's 5.115 Swiss franc. If you compare these two together, with the forward rate, you get 5,115,000, but with the forecasted rate, you would have gotten more, 5,235,000. And the difference is a loss that can be attributed to underpricing in the forward market compared to the future forecast. Is this a cost? Uh, my recommendation is not to trust this future forecast and not to count this as a cost. In fact, forward prices um, are used as an unbiased estimator or a forecast of future prices. In other words, the forward price is the best indication of what we have about what foreign exchanges will do in the future. But this indicator is not a very good one either. If you bet on it, you won't necessarily make money, especially after you consider transaction cost. So let's make this long story short. Um, Personally, my advice is not to consider a forecast trustworthy and not to consider costs associated with a claim that the forward prices today are underpriced or overpriced. Let's go to another huge cost. And this huge cost can be best explained on the graph. Anytime in international finance that they ask you what can go wrong, put your finger on each participant and say, what if they go bankrupt? This includes governments because they could go bankrupt, or they have sovereignty and they may decide not to pay. And this goes for firms and individuals. So, a major thing that can go wrong here is bankruptcy. Number one is bankruptcy of New Kitchen, the customer here. If the customer goes bankrupt, then you could simply wipe out this money and say 6 months from now, we have to stay in line in bankruptcy court, and maybe we get 10 cents for every dollar, maybe we don't. The customer doesn't pay. Let's see what happens to our forward contract. The forward market here, for example, a bank says, I don't care that your customer is bankrupt. I don't have any contract with them. I have a contract with you, Lapointe. You got to do what your contract says or you'll be in default. But this is not so bad because the contract tells us we got to give $1 million 6 months from now to forward market if we are Lapointe. Well, we are a company that has resources. It's not bankrupt, but we have Swiss money. So 6 months from now, we go to the spot market and we give them Swiss francs. Today we don't know how much. Let's say the rate is 5 Swiss francs per dollar. In that case, we give uh, 5 5 million Swiss francs, and the spot market gives us $1 million. We turn around and give the $1 million to the forward market, and we have performed on our contract. And forward market gives us 5,115,000 Swiss franc. And by the way, we just made 115,000 Swiss francs from this deal. We made a gain. Of course, we may not be so lucky, and 6 months from now, Swiss francs can be 6 or some other rate. Let's consider 6 Swiss francs per dollar. Then we have to give 6 million Swiss francs to the spot market and get ourselves $1 million, hand the $1 million to the forward bank, and they give us 5,115,000 Swiss franc, and we have 885,000 Swiss franc losses because of this. This is very familiar. It's something that a few slides back I did also. Essentially, it says if the Americans go bankrupt here and don't pay us, we have the foreign exchange risk, we have transaction exposure, we have to get $1 million of cash flow in the future, and this is in foreign currency. Our home currency is Swiss francs, and we can have gains or losses. We're not covered. A very good analogy that makes us understand the situation is, imagine that you want to purchase life insurance. If something happens to me, I want the life insurance company to pay for my family. They say, fine, but this life insurance does not cover you, has an exclusion if you fly an airplane because that's too risky. In that case, I'm not covered. There is an excluded event. Here too, the event of New Kitchen's bankruptcy is not included in the coverage or insurance that the forward contract gave us. It's an exclusion. What if I don't want an exclusion in my life contract? I go to the insurance company and company's representative and say, look, I'm flying an airplane as a hobby. I don't, but for fun we are considering, right? And the lady says, well, yeah, we have an insurance contract that covers that for life insurance too, but your premium will go up a lot more. You have to pay more premium. Here too, if we want a better hedge, it's available, and it's called option hedge, which we'll discuss in a minute. But forward hedge does not cover us in case of bankruptcy of New Kitchen. Another point to keep in mind is that every one of the contracts that we consider here have a transaction cost. We have to pay something to the intermediary to do the contract. This is something that have been discussed in my last lecture too. There is a bid and ask spread. There is a bid price for buying dollars and an asking price for selling dollars when you go to the foreign exchange market. And these prices are always to the advantage of dealers. But we didn't give you two prices in this example. It's possible to do this example with two prices with a bid and ask spread. And there are some professors who do that. But I feel the gain is not worth the confusion that two different prices in the graph cause. In fact, in practice too, we often consider that there is a certain cost, a percentage cost associated with transaction cost, rather than doing calculations with two prices. All right, let's continue then. Our next lecture is the money market hedge. To motivate this lecture, imagine that you are working for a company like Siemens and your firm sends you to Pakistan and you're going to sell their hospitals a number of these MRI machines, we say in English, or MRT, we say in German. This long machine that you lay down in and goes gar 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 and looks into um, in your inside and makes images for medical reasons. MRI machines. And imagine that these machines are costing about $100,000 each. Okay, so they send you over to Pakistan, and their health ministry signs a contract with your firm. You, as a representative, they say we only can do it in rupees, and we want, let's say, 100 of these machines. That's a large sum, and it's all in foreign currencies. And by the way, they want to pay in 90 days, and they want the machines right away. You are worried. Why? Well, Pakistan is close to a war zone in Afghanistan, and the currency could be volatile. What if it crashes overnight, half price against euro? The whole deal that you have done would cause losses, risky. And this is a risk that you cannot put on the shoulder of your firm, and your boss would not allow it. You say, no problem. I had this lecture, and there is a forward hedge I can do, and I'll go ahead and use that tool. You go and look on the internet, and there are no forward contracts on Pakistani rupee. In fact, forward contracts are available for a handful of large industrialized countries' currencies, and they're active and traded and available from your bank or over the counter, but um, they are not available for other countries. So, what are we going to do? Well, we are going to sit in our kitchen and from scratch bake a forward contract. We're going to make our own. Sounds complicated, but it's not. All it involves is taking a loan. Let's walk through the story. You go to a Pakistani major bank and you say, I want to borrow money. They say, well, who are you? What's your assets? You say, look, I have this contract from your health ministry promising in 90 months these many million rupees for products that I just sold. The banker says, welcome, come sit, come to the back office, get you a tea, and you are doing a loan contract. The banker says, how much money do you want to borrow? You say enough that when it comes due, I pay everything that health ministry pays me, the customer pays me, to you. And I take the money right now and immediately make it to euros and take it home. That's the end of this story. If a loan is allowed, then you are able to make that cash into um, home currency right away at the known price today and take it home. And then later on, when the customer pays, from that proceeds, you pay the bank and you would not have foreign currency exposure. We want to work this scenario better, understand it, and then compare it to the forward contract and see which one is costlier, which one is more beneficial. So first, let's do a verbal definition about the long story that I gave you to motivate the discussion, and that's written in this slide. It says a money market hedge is a foreign loan that can be fully paid off at maturity. Maturity means when the loan comes due, when you have to pay it, you can fully pay it off with the foreign currency cash flows which were causing an exposure to currency risk. So you could get rid of these cash flows, give it toward the loan, and today get cash for it. Let's do an example. The example is the same Harvard Business School example about LaPointe, so we can compare it to the forward contract payoffs. That example said that LaPointe, a Swiss company, um, is receiving this $1 million 6 months from now from the American customer. Of course, American dollars do have forward contracts against Swiss franc, but for sake of exercise, classroom exercise practice, we are going to do this as a money market hedge. So LaPointe goes to an American bank and says, I want to borrow enough today, so in 6 months, I pay you $1 million, and that covers the interest and principal. Principal is the amount of borrowing, and of course, interest is the cost of this financing. Well, from the first course in finance, we know discounting. If that word is new to you, then let's be self-contained and in a few sentences review that lecture. That lecture starts by saying if you have 100 and you have 10% interest, after a year you get 110. So you take your 100 and you multiply it by 1.1, 1 to get your 100 back and 0.1 to get 10% interest. Now if you have 110 a year from now, it is worth 100 today because 100 makes 10 interest and becomes 110. In other words, you can take 110 a year from now and divide it by 1.1. Well, you got 110 by multiplying by 1.1, multiplying 100 by 1.1. Now you divide this 110 by 1.1 and you get 100 as present value of this future cash flow if interest rates are 10%. So this is basically that example. In 6 months, we have $1 million payment. What is its value? What is its present value? How much should we borrow today? So after 6 months, we pay $1 million for principal and interest. We got to discount this 1 million by dividing it by 1 plus the interest rate. The yearly interest rate, which is what we always quote in finance, yearly, is 10%. So we simply divide it by 2 and say if you have their money for 6 months, you pay a rent of 5% or half of 10% because you have it for half of the period on this money. So $1 million divided by 1.05 gives you $952,381. If you borrow this from the bank after 6 months, multiplying by 1.05, and you pay 5% interest and you pay the principal back, and that's $1 million. So our problem is solved. Now, if we are the LaPointe Swiss company, we take this 952,381 and we immediately run home with it. We give it to the exchange market, and immediately the rate S is 5 Swiss franc per dollar, and multiply that by 952,381. They give us 4,761,905 Swiss franc, which we can immediately transfer back to our firm's account in Switzerland. Now, in Switzerland, we could invest this money. You might say, why? Well, the reason is we want to compare this with the forward contract and see what our cash flow would be after 6 months. Because this 4,761,905 Swiss franc is our cash flow in Swiss franc at time 0. After 6 months investing it at the Swiss interest rates of 14.83%, of course, the case assumes that you can make this interest rate, um, amounts to multiplying it by 1 to get your money back, and 0.07415, or half of 14.83%, to get interest on this money for 6 months. And the total return becomes 5,115,000 Swiss franc cash flow after 6 months. Let me pause as my battery is getting low and continue later. All right, so we have 5,115,000 Swiss francs if we do a money market hedge after 6 months, and this number is very familiar to us. Deja vu all over. That's an old joke because someone who doesn't know what deja vu means says all over again. Anyways, the number is familiar because that's exactly what we got when we did the forward hedge. Let's go back and check. The money market hedge gave us 5,115,000, and the forward hedge also gives us 5,115,000 Swiss francs after 6 months. Okay. Then the question is, how come? Why this money is exactly the same as before? Did I cheat? Well, I learned this example from Harvard Business School lecture notes. And did they cheat, or is there something else behind it? There is something else behind it. Let's leave it a minute so you could sort of think and guess what could cause exactly the same payoff in these two methods. First, let's do a little bit of a graph. This is a graph similar to before. It says money market hedge. You got New Kitchen, which is an American company. It promises to pay for the product $1 million 6 months from now. And you got a Swiss company that delivers the product today. And this whole thing is a deal done on credit. Then LaPointe goes to an American bank and borrows money, something that you would receive today. They borrow $952,381 at time 0. And in 6 months, they would pay back $1 million. In other words, this $1 million that comes from New Kitchen goes directly to the bank, and we don't have to worry about dollars if we are a foreign firm, the Swiss company, foreign to the dollars. Because we can take these dollars and immediately make them into Swiss francs in the spot market. And in that market are 952,381, which we exchanged at the spot market of 5 Swiss franc per dollar, becomes 4,761,905 Swiss francs. We received the Swiss francs, and to see how much money we would have in 6 months. We invested 4,761,905 invested at 14.85% rate gives us 5,115,000 Swiss francs after 6 months. The nice thing about this graph is it can tell us what goes wrong. And as before, the major problem was bankruptcy. And forward contract had a problem. In event of bankruptcy of New Kitchen, we lost our forward hedge. Let's see how is the situation with money market hedge. Here too, New Kitchen goes bankrupt and this $1 million doesn't come to us. By the way, it's not accurate analysis to say this $1 million is a cost of our hedge. It's not a hedging cost. And this item number one is dealing in credit market, something that we do in domestic finance and we do in international finance, giving credit to a customer. We got to give credit to our customers carefully and have a credit policy, and there is a loss involved. Uh, let's say the bank knows that 99 out of 100 in this pool will pay their loan and one will go bankrupt and will not. But the bank doesn't know which one. So they charge those 99 more, so they cover the dead bit. Same story here. In domestic market, giving credit, we price in the bankruptcy risk. We charge for it. And we have a good credit policy that makes it possible to do so. So this $1 million sometimes is lost because customer goes bankrupt, but it's not a cost of international finance. It's not a cost of foreign exchange risk. It's not a transaction exposure. So let's see what's transaction exposure that we're left with in this money market hedge. New Kitchen doesn't pay, the 1 million doesn't come. Then we go to US Bank. US Bank says, I don't care that your customers are not paying you or a customer isn't paying you. Doesn't involve me. You have a contract with me. You got a loan, you got to pay off your loan, or you would be in default and we go to bankruptcy court. So the story is exactly the same as forward. We got to go to a spot market now, and in the spot market, we would change our Swiss money into dollars, and we don't know what the rate is 6 months from now. It could be 5 or 6, and depending on that rate, we have an exposure. We can make gains or losses from this foreign currency exposure or transaction exposure that we had originally. So if New Kitchen goes bankrupt and we have a money market hedge, we will have a exposure. In other words, New Kitchen's bankruptcy is an exclusion from this insurance or hedging contract. So notice that on two scores, this money market hedge became similar to the forward hedge. First of all, it generated the exact same cash flow, 5,115,000 Swiss francs 6 months from now, in both cases. Second, it did not give us any coverage. It gave us loss or gains if New Kitchen went bankrupt, and the exact same thing applied to forward contract. If we don't want this exclusion, we do money market hedge. But this is a good point, or a good place to discuss why money market hedge and forward hedge are similar. This takes us to um, forward back to the story of why money market hedge and forward hedge give us exact same payoff of 5,115,000 Swiss franc. Part of the story came from the little cheat sheet that I had at the beginning of this lecture. So and let's go way back and look at that cheat sheet. It said 5.115 divided by 5 equals 1.023 equals 1.07415 divided by 105. This 5.115 was F, divided by 5 was S, forward divided by spot, equals to 1 plus 7.415%, which was the 6-month foreign interest rate. 1 year was 14.83, divided by uh, the 6-month domestic interest rate, which was 5%. In other words, this was the forward parity. Here is the interest rate parity equation, which we did in another lecture. F divided by S equals the return on the foreign interest divided by the return on the domestic interest. 1 plus RF divided by 1 plus RD. When we are doing the forward hedge, we are dealing with this F. We are getting the forward rate um, and we are dealing with that. When we are doing the money market hedge, we are dealing with the entire right hand side of this equation. And of course, this equation is just a rewriting of interest rate parity equation. The right hand side says you first borrow money in the foreign country and pay interest on it, so you multiply by 1 plus the foreign interest rate. Then you forgive me, you divide by 1 uh, plus the interest rate in US in this example, because you're borrowing in US and that was RD. You have to discount when you borrow. So you divide by 1 plus RD. That's the first thing we did when we borrowed from a bank in US, if we were the Swiss company. Then we made the proceeds into Swiss francs, so if we multiply by S, or for every dollar we got 5 Swiss francs. And then we invested the money in Switzerland, and now we are multiplying it by 1 plus Swiss interest rates for 6 months. So the 3 operations on the right hand side: borrowing in US, discounting by that rate, dividing by 1 plus R, exchanging at the spot market, and then investing in Switzerland is a money market hedge, and that's on the right hand side of the equation. And by interest rate parity, it's equal to the left hand side of the equation, which is the forward. So the reason that money market hedge and forward hedge give us the exact same payoff in the future is that the interest rate parity equation holds in this example. And that's something that numerically I did at the bottom of the slide when I started my example. All right, let's look at a different hedge, which is called option market hedge. Next, let's focus on an option market hedge. First, we need to define what an option is. As our goal was to have lectures that are self-contained, and therefore I don't want to rely on your prior knowledge. Discuss what we need in this lecture. It says a currency option gives the holder the right but no obligation. Hence this word option. If a class is optional, you could take it or you could substitute another class for it. So this word option says you have the right to do a certain action, but you don't have to. You don't have an obligation. Perhaps we should start with a real option on real estate, which would get us to the easiest way to understand options. Your company sends you to purchase a land parcel um, on intersection of two major roads because your firm wants to build a shopping center there. You tell the landowner how much for your land. She says $100,000. You say, well, we don't know if we're going to get financing for this shopping center. We don't know if this project is going to work. Would you give us the right to purchase this land? Let us buy this land if we want to for $100,000 until September 2 years from now. The landowner has to wait for you 2 years. And even worse, if you are in a country where land prices are very volatile and the price of land goes to 200,000 in 2 years, if she contracts to sell it to you for 100,000, you definitely will show up and buy it half price and turn around and sell it for 200,000. In legal words, she is giving up some of her property rights through this contract. The contract that allows you to buy it for 100,000 would violate some of her property rights because she cannot sell it at market price. Actually, she cannot sell it because she has to wait for you to show up. She wouldn't have the underlying asset. Of course, there are complications with this short position, which we ignore right now. All right. So we know what a real option is. Now let's change the underlying contract, underlying asset, and make it a stock. For example, you have the right but no obligation to purchase a share of Siemens for €80. Let's say by expiration date of September 21, 2020. At that date, if the share price of Siemens is more than 80, you would purchase it and make some money. For example, if it's 90, you would make €10. But if the share price is 50, you're smart. You're not going to pay 80 for something that is worth 50. So this idea of option means that you have a right but no obligation to purchase the underlying asset. So let's go back to this definition. A currency option, so the underlying asset is currency, gives the holder the right but no obligation to exchange a given cash flow at a predetermined exchange rate. And that exchange rate is called exercise or strike price on or before the maturity date. Let's say the maturity date is 6 months. If we can only exchange our money 6 months from now, we call this a European option. If you are allowed to exercise your option anytime between now and 6 months, we call it an American option. Let's look at the cost for this option. Before we do, I'm reviewing a couple of key points about options. If we have the right to purchase the underlying asset, we call it a call option. If we have the right to sell the underlying asset at a given price, we call it the put option. And of course, I defined American versus European options. Back to example of an option market hedge. We are working exactly with the same example that we did our forward contract and our money market hedge. We have this company LePointe, and it has $1 million coming to it um, from US 6 months from now. LePointe wants to hedge this purchasing options. The first problem is that these option contracts are standardized. Standardization means they are available in equal units, for example, $10,000 each. So if I want to have $1 million worth of coverage, then I have to divide 1 million by 10,000, and therefore I would need 100 of these options. The second issue about these options is they are available at different exercise prices. But because we want to make the costs compatible with forward and money market hedge, let's take exactly the same price that we had in the forward market. 5.115 Swiss franc buys $1 in 6 months. Options require an option premium. Let's explain this option premium by going back to that real option on real estate or land purchase. The lady that was giving you the right to purchase the land for $100,000 was giving up some property rights. She would demand some money for giving up those rights. In other words, forward contracts are fair to both parties. One party promises to purchase at this fixed price, and the other party promises to sell at that fixed price. And for both sides, these promises are mandatory. They can't default, or we go to bankruptcy court. Option gives you a right but no obligation. But if you exercise, the other side doesn't have an option. They must provide you the underlying asset. So it's not equal to both parties. It's not fair to the option rider. So option rider demands a money equal to the value of giving up this right. And in fact, we can calculate the value of an option. Black and Scholes came up with a formula that theoretically calculates it. It's a relatively simple formula with available inputs, which we can put in an Excel sheet and or a calculator and calculate it. And in 1970s, when they came up with this formula, options also started trading in Chicago, and the market that was trading options and this Black and Scholes formula come up with relatively similar prices. There are some differences, but that's at this point a matter of technical difference. There are quite similar. And of course, these option calculations have a long history in mathematics. Quite a few mathematicians were after a formula that values options, and it took a very long time until 1970s that sort of formula can be devised. And Black and Scholes won the Nobel Prize at that time. Black had passed away, so only Scholes got the Nobel Prize. Back to our story about this option. You pay an option premium because it's not a fair contract. You compensate the other party for giving you a right but no obligation. And that option premium could be expensive. In our example, it's 0.15 or 15 Swiss franc cents for every dollar that we exchange. You also pay a brokerage fee because options are traded through an exchange, and this trade makes sure that neither party goes bankrupt, and a broker can deal with the exchange. And here the brokerage fee is 125 Swiss franc per contract. So look at our total cost for this option hedge. Cost of one contract is 15 French franc cents for every dollar that we cover. And a contract is $10,000, so multiplied by 10,000 plus a brokerage fee of 125, so 1,625 Swiss franc is cost of one option. Multiplied by 100, and then you would get $1,000,000 of coverage, and that would cost you 162,500 Swiss francs. So the option becomes an expensive contract, and this option premium is completely lost when we hedge, because when we hedge, at the end we have to exercise the option when the foreign currency goes against us and we would have losses. We want to use our option, and when the foreign currency goes for us, this option is not valuable, expires without value. So this complete 162,500 Swiss francs can be considered as the cost of this option market hedge, and the forward hedge did not have this cost. So this is a much more expensive insurance. But let's look at its benefit. Back to a picture on item number 1, which is very familiar to us. We have the Swiss company selling products to the Americans and receiving a promise of $1,000,000 in 6 months from now. And on item number 2, we have the Swiss company going to an option market and receiving this option but no obligation to pay $1,000,000 to that market in 6 months and receive 5,115,000 Swiss francs. However, there is this additional cash flow that goes from the point to the option market today at time 0, and that's 162,500 Swiss franc total cost of this option premium and brokerage fees, transaction cost. Now let's go to future. 6 months passes, and the Swiss franc is at a rate of 5. So if we are Le Point, we receive our $1,000,000 from the Americans, we can hand it over to the spot market and get 5 million Swiss francs for it at a rate of 5. But if we exercise our option, we give the option contracts that give us the right of getting 5.115 Swiss franc per dollar, together with $100,000 to the option market, and the option market pays us 5,115,000 Swiss franc. So we would have 115,000 gain compared to that rate of 5. In other words, we have a hedge that gives us 5,115,000. Now imagine that we are in scenario 2 that we considered before. Swiss franc is 6 against dollar. Now if we give our $1,000,000 to the spot market 6 months from now, we receive $6,000,000. We could simply throw this option in trash that gives us the right but no obligation to give our $1,000,000 and receive 5,115,000 Swiss franc for it. In fact, that option would be without value and would be thrown in trash. But we have 6 million Swiss franc, something that we didn't have if we had a forward contract or a money market hedge. In other words, with the option contract, the sky is the limit. All the gains are ours. What we have done is we have put a floor on our losses. and the floor is 5,115,000 Swiss franc if we are La Pointe. $1 million in the future is worth 5,115,000 Swiss francs for us or more, whatever more we get because the currency appreciates. Okay, so far we discussed an advantage of option market hedge, and that advantage was that it places a floor on our losses and all the gains are ours. And we discussed a disadvantage, and that disadvantage was the fact that it's expensive. There is a second advantage that already have been discussed in these lectures, but not so obviously. Let's make a stronger point about that second disadvantage. And that's bankruptcy of New Kitchen. If New Kitchen goes bankrupt and that $1 million doesn't come to us, then we simply don't exercise the option. We have no obligation to give $1 million to the option market and receive 5,115,000 Swiss francs as we had an ironclad obligation in the forward market. In fact, as soon as the bankruptcy happens, we could look at our option contract, and if it still has some value because some time is left on it, we could sell it in the option markets to someone else and receive some of our um, value or option cost back. I say some of it because there are brokerage fees and, of course, option contracts. And of course, option contracts could do anything, and they could go up and down in price. So we don't know how much we get back. But minimum price of an option contract is zero because we can always tear it and throw it in the garbage. We don't have an obligation to do the contract. If the value is negative, we don't exercise it. All right, so the benefit of an option is that in bankruptcy, we still have insurance or hedge. Remember that analogy to not being covered by life insurance when one flies an airplane, an exclusion of an insurance. Option market is a better hedge because it doesn't have an exclusion of coverage when New Kitchen goes bankrupt. When the cash flow that your customer sent you doesn't come in due to bankruptcy, an option contract um, still provides you um, hedging, does not leave you without an hedge, does not leave you with exposure to transaction risk. A typical exam question is what happens if New Kitchen is bankrupt? And in case of an option contract, you would say that we can sell our options, we don't have to exercise it, therefore, we don't have to worry about transaction exposure showing its ugly head. We wouldn't be exposed to this risk again. And if the exam question is the option premium entirely a cost? You say in case of bankruptcy, no, we recoup this. But otherwise, if we have an option um, hedge and we keep it for the entire period, and this option premium would be the cost of the hedge because at the end, the option would either be without value or when it is of value, we exercise it and therefore we can't sell it to someone else and recoup an option cost or option price. So the initial fee that we pay for this option premium could be considered as a cost. Now let's briefly talk about futures versus forward contracts. In the five methods that we considered for hedging, we did not consider a future hedge. Let's see why, and let's see what are future hedges. Future contracts have certain features that are similar to forward contracts. And this came up in one of my earlier lectures that you had in this class. That is, in a future contract, um, we have a solid obligation to um, exchange an underlying asset with another asset. For example, the forward contract gave us the solid obligation to give our dollars after 6 months and receive Swiss francs. The future contract does the exact same thing. In that sense, it's different from options. Option gives us a right but no obligation, but future and forwards give us an obligation uh, to perform what the contract says. However, future contracts also have certain things that are similar with option contracts. One of those things is that future contracts are standardized. There are many of them, they are traded on an exchange, and therefore they are liquid. It means you can buy and sell them at a market price and at a fair price get out of them. Forward contracts are not liquid. We usually stay in a forward contract and deliver at the end. They are used for hedging. For this reason, we often use a forward contract to hedge against transaction risks that come up with products because we want that underlying asset to be delivered. For example, the foreign currency. With future contracts, we use a type of hedging that has to do with value of some economic factor. The best example I can give you is your company has a subsidiary in Japan, and that subsidiary works very hard, but Japanese economy happens to be not good. And when it's not good, your profits are going to be much smaller. So you want to hedge against the entire Japanese economy not performing, going into a recession. Um, this you do with future contracts. For example, you sell Nikkei 225 futures. This is the value of 225 stocks of major Japanese companies that trade at the morning session of Tokyo Stock Exchange. And if that value goes down, usually that happens in a recession. All these companies are doing bad. And because you sell this contract, you are going to make some money if the value goes down. But when the economic times are good, your subsidiary makes considerable profits, but the value of this 225 contracts go up too, and therefore this future contract causes you some risk. Um, Causes you some loss, and you pay for that loss. So getting into that future contract allows you to have some extra income when Japanese economy does bad and your subsidiary is not doing so well. You supplement your subsidiary's income. You hedge against the risk of Japanese economy, and when it does fabulously well, you have some losses from this future contract, which you pay from your fabulous profits. So futures are used for hedging, but it's a different kind of hedging. It's hedging of a risk of the nature of the Japanese economic risk affecting your subsidiary. For transaction um, exposure, or for the kind of risk that we want the underlying product to be delivered to us, we use forward contracts. Couple of items I want to emphasize about future contracts. Future contracts have mark to market. That means if we have potential risk of losing money, the exchange calls us and asks us to deposit additional funds. These mark-to-markets um, cause cash flows over time. And usually the company's treasurers don't like these extra cash flows. Forward contracts don't have these extra payments in the middle. At the end, you deliver and you perform on the forward. So that's another reason for using forward contracts if you are hedging transaction risk. The exchange calculates all potential future losses and obligations due to today's price fluctuation of the underlying asset. It asks the future contract holder to pay a maintenance margin to ensure performance. And if we don't have these maintenance margins, the exchange kicks us out of our position and liquidates the deposit amount or the initial um, deposits that we have made for this contract, and that also means that we would lose our hedge. So that's another reason for not using future contracts for hedging transaction risk. Forwards are delivered, futures are usually settled for cash. It means at the end, if you have a futures contract, they give you some money for your losses and gains. But if you have a forward contract and underlying asset is wheat, at the end, trucks would come to your depot and deliver tons of wheat as per the contract. So usually this is for a miller. This is not for someone who wants to bet on the movement of price of that commodity. Um, Forwards are traded on banks or over the counter, but futures are traded on organized exchange and therefore they are liquid. We are able to sell them in the middle. If we get into a forward contract, we usually keep it until maturity, and these are not liquid contracts. Futures are a standardized contract. Forwards can be tailor-made to your needs. If you want to hedge 1,562,312 dollars, because that's what the customer is paying you 6 months from now, you can do it with a forward contract. But with futures, it has to be multiples of the amount that that one future standard contract is. For example, units of 10,000. And otherwise, you cannot hedge. Futures are liquid contracts. You can sell them at a fair price and quickly. They have mark to market. Um, Issue of bankruptcy is interesting. If I was teaching this lecture a generation ago, um, when I took the course, one would say that forward contracts do not go bankrupt. But we have seen bankruptcy of forwards in Russia. In 1998, when the Russian ruble crashed, there were forward contracts on ruble. One side was all Russian companies with Russian banks, um, um, basically hedging foreign currency against ruble, and all those companies and banks couldn't uh, uh, perform according to their obligation. Futures are much less likely to go bankrupt because exchange makes this mark to markets and keeps deposits to prevent bankruptcy. In fact, we had a major bankruptcy um, that Mr. Leeson caused, um, a major British bank going bankrupt. And in that case, people who had future contracts that one side of it was the bankrupt firm did not lose any money because Singapore Exchange had sufficient funds as deposit that could pay for all these future contracts. And finally, I explained maintenance margin, which is something that you pay as there are potential losses with your future contracts. Futures are used to generally hedge the underlying risk rather than to deliver the underlying asset. Um, Example, a German company that hedges the risk of doing business in Japan versus a company that hedges the foreign exchange transaction risk of yen. Um, why do we buy a future rather than an option? Um, One issue is the cost. The option premium is expensive. The future contract does not have a premium. For most options, there is a cash settlement and there is no delivery. However, one can also find options that allow delivery, but they are rare. This takes us to classroom exercises, which allows you to fully understand this lecture. Exercise number one gives the same LaPointe example with different numbers. Please work this example fully and explain different hedging with these new numbers. The class exercise number two says look up the exchange rate and interest rates for euro and dollar from real markets. Pick realistic numbers for two industrial countries of your own choice. Um, you could massage these numbers a bit, making sure that interest rate parity holds, and then numerically go through these exercises that we had for LaPointe, but for two different countries, drawing the same graphs and making the same exercise calculations that you and I had in this lecture. Classroom exercise 3 gives this uh, problem with slightly different numbers and asks you to drill an exercise by calculating entire three different hedging methods using these numbers. And finally, classroom exercise 4 states that we do a forward and money market hedge with a new set of numbers that are given in this slide. Best of luck with this lecture.